Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our series on introductory syntax. Today, I'm going to be doing a little bit of sort of overview of movement, reviewing a couple of things that we've covered over the last couple of videos. I'm going to start off with the sentences that I left you with at the last video. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the quantifier movement that we had either 2 videos ago, or maybe it was 3 videos ago, and then talk a little bit about the minimal link condition that Carney talks about. Also, we can think about it as relativized minimality. We've seen that surfacing in a lot of our discussion before, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. If you have questions about it, I really would encourage you to take a look at the book. I think it's a really intuitive idea. But our 2 sentences that I left you with last time, Hadass seems to be likely to leave, and it seems Hadass is likely to leave. So this is, these sentences are kind of have double raising, or at least the top one does, and then the second one is an example that has raising at to the intermediate level and then stops. So it's a really nice illustration of the raising construction that we saw last time because we have 2 raising predicates. So let's start by looking at Hadass seems to be likely to leave. The questions I received over this dealt with a lot with the lexical status of categorical status of likely. And I just want to remind everyone that when we're thinking about category, especially in our XBAR schematics, category is not as critical as it was in, say, phrase structure grammar. I mean, obviously, we have a sense of category, but when we look at things like likely, we saw some examples last time as well, that, with happy, where I used happy, and I put that, I started the theta assignment with happy in that specifier position. And it really is helpful to think about both adjectives and verbs as forms of predicates, and predicates have theta notions. Now, obviously, adjectives have a different distribution in many contexts. They distributionally can modify nouns in a way that verbs can't. But in these sort of copular constructions, is likely, is happy, these types of things are predicates, and so they're going to have theta assignments, and so forth. And just to give further sort of credence to this idea, there are the notion of an adjective is not a universal. Adjectives are often expressed through sort of verbal. Through sort of verbal expression. It is very much a Monday. I made myself an entire pot of espresso, which I intend to drink throughout this video. Okay, so let's start off with Hadass seems to be likely to leave. Again, I'm going to start, just because my whiteboard is pretty small, by drawing the entire structure on the tree, or on the of the tree on the board, and then we'll work through it. And again, I'm going to leave off the highest CP. Know that it's there. Know that we have a minus Q CP because this is a declarative. Now, and again, we can think about other ways that we can start incorporating other types of movements into these constructions, passive, question, and all of these types of movement can work together, and it can get real messy. I know dead air is not the most exciting thing. I could, maybe I should play the Jeopardy theme or something like that. I'm not going to do that, actually. Because that will distract me, and then I will make a mistake. And I don't want to make a mistake. Because I'm already far too likely to make a mistake. So this is going to be, an interesting, we're going to see, I think for the first time, we saw last time an adjective taking a specifier, and I said that that's not necessarily, that's not necessarily the only analysis you could take there, but we're definitely going to see an adjective, in this case, taking a complement, and that is, it's not happy, it's likely. That is the analysis we need to take here. So this is a very large tree, and there's still some details missing, namely the featural requirements of a lot of elements that I want to fill in. But you can see the overall tree structure. So this is basically, we can think about this as the deep structure of this tree. So again, if we go back to that model we built, and again, this is going to be different than, say, a more modern minimalist model. So if you're familiar with these sort of minimalist constraints, and something we'll talk about in some of our closing videos. But a more minimalist approach to syntax is not gonna start with a fully built tree, but a model that has this sort of deep structure this is how it's gonna start. It's gonna start with a fully built tree that is developed out of the XBAR rules. And there are certain things that, again, I said I left off here. So I'm going to fill those in really quickly. So we have T up here. It is finite. So it's actually plus, I'm going to say minus past. It's going to be plus nominative and plus EPP. Two down here is minus infinitive and plus EPP. And then this 2 is also minus infinitive and plus EPP. Those are our features on T. This DP definitely needs to get its case feature valued. We haven't really talked in detail about how case, what the case requirements of a DP are. I'm just going to say, use this like little alpha notation that says case. My assumption is going to be that DPs need case, but they're not really they're omnivorous about what kind of case they can require. So it just wants to find a case position. It doesn't really care about what that case position looks like. So that's it has a case requirement and also has a theta requirement, but it's immediately being satisfied in that theta requirement by its position with leave. So this is the basic structure. And again, it being satisfied by its theta requirement with leave is part of the deep structure, the D structure. So then we have to essentially deal with any other types of movement that must occur. And the core movement that is occurring here is what's known as is this raising construction. So again, I'm going to switch colors here. And here, Hadass is going to raise into the specifier of this TP. And it carries with it all of the features that it has when it moves. And it's going to satisfy the EPP feature of 2 by being here. So the fact that this specifier position is now full satisfies this EPP feature. It's going to raise again into the specifier position of this adjective phrase. And we haven't talked explicitly about this, but you've seen me do this multiple times. And the reason behind this, and we saw this when we talked about WH movement, is a principle, and in the Carney textbook, this is referred to as the minimal link condition. You can also think about it as something like a notion that you might see referred to as relativized minimality, or the minimality condition. And the core idea is that movement must occur to the closest possible landing site of the relevant type. So essentially, and this is also the same way that agreement occurs and other types of syntactic relationships occur, that you need to occur in local relationships, that all syntax is local. And so that you're basically, you can think about it as taking steps. You always take a journey by the shortest step possible, by, taking a step. You're not going to do a long jump. And so you're going to move up the tree, you're just going to keep moving through each possible spot you can go to that is of the relevant type. So we're doing a movement, so we're going to stop at every type of position that could hold an argument. So that's going to be the specifiers of things that normally hold arguments. So specifiers of adjectives, specifiers of verb phrases. When we're doing a bar movement like we do with WH phrases, that's when we see longer chains, but things that move to like specifiers of CPs, because that's where those WH phrases move, for instance. And we're going to do a bar movement when we look at those quantifiers in a little bit. But so it is, we're going to bound up here. And so the critical thing about this idea of relativized minimality, and maybe one thing that I'm not making clear here, is that it requires us, again, by doing this, it requires us to move into positions that are not filled. And you notice that all of these positions are open and available to us. So if I had an argument in one of these positions, suddenly this would become ungrammatical, and that's exactly the type of prediction that we want. So that is the big advantage of this, is that by we can't do basically bound around things. So we can't get a sentence like, Hadass seems it is likely to leave, which we might predict would be possible if this type of movement wasn't required. So that's sort of the core notion of why relativized minimality or minimal link holds, is that by doing these types of movements where we just are moving into each intermediate required elements, we end up satisfying things like the EPP. Because think about why Hadass is moving. Hadass is moving for case. So if Hadass only had to move up to TP and could just move straight up there, well, then we would still be left down here with an unsatisfied EPP position. And we would predict then that we would get an expletive. So Hadass seems it, well, in this case, really we should do it with the next, well, actually wouldn't work. Yeah, actually it would work with the next example. Hadass seems is likely to leave, not acceptable. So in this case, Hadass will keep moving because Hadass is not satisfied with case in this position. So on the next example, we'll see this. But it's still, the point still holds. This position, this TP position, if Hadass was able to just skip around it, would not be, the EPP would not be satisfied, and this would be ungrammatical. But it's clearly grammatical. So Hadass will stop off here, and then all the way up here, where Hadass will receive case and check the EPP features. So there's a lot of stopping, a lot of intermediate movement in this structure. Okay, doing our next tree is very, very simple. I'm just going to actually erase a few things on this tree because structurally it's very similar. The structures are essentially identical. So the movement is obviously going to be different, and I just don't want to. So let's start that again. And some of the features are going to be different because we have a different featural makeup. And we have it because we have a tensed. Okay. So the key difference between these two trees is the finiteness down here. So in this T is minus past plus EPV. So there's a relation here between B and T, in this case, overt head movement. Easy. This becomes is. So we have overt head movement there. We still have all the other same relations here. So T up here is minus past. Oh, this T is also plus nom, sorry. Minus past plus EPP plus nom. Here we have minus finite plus EPP. Hadass is omnivorous for case and needs a theta roll. Receives its theta roll from leave. Okay. As before, Hadass is going to raise in the same way. I'm not going to fill in each of the copies, but we're just going to see Hadass raise. So Hadass is going to raise into TP, into here by stopping here. It's going to satisfy that EPP feature. It's going to stop here. Stop here. And then stop here. And this is the critical point where Hadass stops. And the answer, and why? Well, because Hadass is moving to satisfy this omnivorous case requirement. So checks, gets nominative case, checks the EPP, and is done moving. DPs are selfish movers. Even though this TP up here still has an EPP feature that needs to be satisfied, Hadass is not, this DP Hadass is not going to move any further because the case has been satisfied, no further movement. So here is where we're going to get it inserted, and that's going to check the EPP feature up high. So it seems Hadass is likely to leave. And that's the key difference between these two sentences. And again, we can see the impact of relativized minimality, minimal link condition, because if Hadass was able to just bound up to this specifier of TP, we would get the wrong prediction. Because this position down here would be able to get an expletive, and we would get Hadass seems it is likely to leave, and that is ungrammatical. So those are our raising, the raising sentences. The other question I was asked dealt with the quantifiers. And partially this is because I didn't do any trees with the quantifiers. And it was somewhat intentional because the quantifiers don't have, I didn't want to do trees because we were looking at covert movement. And that can trip a lot of people up to see covert movement on a tree, especially in intro syntax. But I think as long as we're clear that what we're talking about is covert movements. And again, this is a concept that I think is difficult for a lot of people. So we want to let's get back to this model that we're building. So, and again, this is an older model. This is not the most contemporary model, but it is a useful model for us to understand. That we start with a model which has when we're building a sentence, we start with a fully formed underlying structure, which is the output of our X-bar rules and requires the computation of our theta rules. From there, we apply certain syntactic operations. And at some points, we produce something that we're going to refer to as surface structure. Out of that, we send off one element to something called phonological or phonetic form. We haven't talked much about this and how this differs from these two. For our purposes, we're just going to treat these two as the same. There are some operations that may occur. But then here, we also have another set of operations that can occur here. And in principle, the same types of operations that occur between these levels may occur between these levels. And that's the core concept, is that we can have syntactic operations occurring between deep structure and surface structure, and between surface structure and LF. So the sentence I was looking at last time was some critic reviewed every movie. And we saw that this sentence is ambiguous. That this sentence is ambiguous in a way where you can get a reading where there's one individual critic who has reviewed every movie, or you can get a reading where it doesn't matter that there's one critic. What matters is that all movies have been reviewed by each critic. And we can actually describe these two differences in what's known as semantic scope or quantifier scope. So in reading 1, where it's the critic, we say some X, some critic, has wide scope over movies, the universal quantifier. So if you're not familiar with these symbols, it doesn't much matter. And then in reading 2, the universal quantifier takes wide scope over the existential quantifier. And we also saw that universal quantifier can have the same restrictions on movement. So the core argument was that this reading is the output of a movement operation. So if I said some critic reviewed every movie and bought a sweater, that suddenly only this first reading was available. So what I want to do now is just show you how to derive the first sentence, or these sentences. It's very, very simple. We're going to utilize the specifier of CP as our landing position. It may be another position. It may be something like a Q position or something like that, a quantifier position higher than CP or something like that. It doesn't really much matter. It's just a position high in the tree where these quantifiers end up going. And that's basically what we're going to say. So we need to have a CP. It is a declarative sentence. We'll have a TP. T is minus pass, or plus pass, excuse me. Plus nom, plus EPP. It's going to select for a verb phrase, which is reviewed. DP here, which is some critic, and our V here reviewed with another DP here. Every movie. And so this is the D structure. We're getting theta assignment here and here, case assignment here. So every movie is doubly satisfied in this position, but some critic is still omnivorous for case. That's just the term I'm going to use for this. So it is going to end up raising into the specifier of T, where it's going to get its case. So some critic reviewed every movie. This is gone. Is the pronounced sentence. Now, to get the first reading of the sentence, that we don't have to do anything. This is the reading. This is the scope where we get existential over universal. So we don't have to do anything. But there, at LF, we apparently have a semantic operation or a syntactic operation which allows us, when we have quantifiers, to reorder them if the semantics requires it. So here we have, and we're going to call this quantifier raising. So if the interpretation requires us to grab a quantifier phrase and move it to a higher position, we can do this. But we do this at LF. We don't pronounce this. So what we would do is, and I'm going to use yet another color for this to indicate that this is not happening at a pronounced level, is that we're going to grab every movie to get our wide scope and move it up. So it's going to just move up to that position. And notice that it is not changing the pronunciation. The critical thing is it doesn't change the pronunciation. This is happening after the derivation is split. There are languages that arguably do have this earlier, before the derivation split. So like Hungarian arguably does this earlier. But English does this later. But the core argument that this is actually happening as a syntactic operation comes from the arguments that we saw from things like some critic reviewed every movie and bought a sweater, which is those are those same types of islands that we saw with WH phrases. So we can't do these movement operations when movement is constrained in the same ways when it's constrained when we pronounce things. So that's LF in a nutshell. There's a little bit more to it, but that's the sort of core concept of LF. Okay, so we reviewed raising. We talked more about the sort of core concepts of the minimal link condition, also known as relativized minimality, and we reviewed a little bit more about quantifier raising and LF. So that was the core ideas today. So I want to close off there. Going into the next couple of videos, I'll probably do a couple more review topics. We still need to address dealing with ditransitives and talking a little bit more about some of the intricacies of the verb phrase itself. So we will work on that. We're also going to then start thinking about, and I'm not going to spend an inordinate amount of time on this, but we have been developing a model that is not the most contemporary model, and I want to at least give you the tools to be aware of the more contemporary models. So I will start talking about the sort of minimalist transitions and things like that. So I'm going to head in those directions over the next few videos. I want to, as always, leave with a piece of philosophy that I find helpful. So yesterday was, as I'm recording this, yesterday was Marcus Aurelius's birthday. So I'm going to pull a quote from Marcus Aurelius. When you need encouragement, think of the qualities of people around you. You have this one's energy, that one's modesty, another's generosity, and so on. Nothing is as encouraging as when virtues are visibly embodied in the people around us, when we are practically showered with them. It's good to keep this in mind. I know right now we're in a moment of social isolation, but we can still think of those that we look up to, and draw positives from them, and even those that are role models from the past and so forth. So again, I will stop there and wish you all good health and good syntaxing.